Good morning, Don't Unfriend Me Nation. Early morning. It's Red Friday. Happy Red Friday. I was out of Don't Unfriend Me Red Friday shirts, so I'm wearing Grunt Style. Love Grunt Style. One of the reasons I got into the t-shirt business. Tim and Dan, both good dudes. Well, Dan's still a good dude, just no longer with Grunt Style, but that's a whole nother story, a whole nother conversation. Remind me to tell you the time that I decided to have a few drinks of America whiskey from Grunt Style and went through a couple bottles. A good time. But anyway, go buy shirts over at thedumshow.com. Don't go to Grunt Style. All right. So now that we've established where to buy your mercantile, a little bit different this morning. I was going over past thoughts and, why I got into politics and why I decided to do a show and everything else. And, it always kind of went back to one answer was Ronald Reagan and the Iran-Contra hearings. I remember leaving my middle school where my grandmother worked as a line operator in the lunch line. She would collect monies and stuff and I'd essentially steal for all the kids. And it's not right, but she would wave us through and make sure we got free French bread pizza and boxed Welch's grape juice. And instead of paying, they would just wave us through. And I don't know why. We didn't need the money, but, teaching ethics at a very young age to children obviously was not the forte of my grandparents. But the one thing that they did instill upon us was a love for the United States. My grandfather was a John Wayne aficionado and buff, and he had the commemorative coins and the old Winchester and had a tomahawk and a headdress in his house. I mean, the guy was just, the prototypical American cowboy wannabe more than anything. And my grandmother also was very interested in Paul Harvey, and that's where my love for Paul Harvey came. And I remember when she would go home after lunch, about an hour or so, I would leave school and go with her home almost every day to watch the Iran-Contra hearings. And she lived right by the school. And, of course, I was all the way across town where we lived on the east side of Ventura. But the funny thing is that's where my love of Ronald Reagan came from. And I specifically remember I want to say 1980, 1979. And that's I had cognitive recognition at a fairly young age. I remembered things from when I was 2.5. My parents still couldn't believe it when I would bring things up and they would be talking about something. I say, oh yeah, I remember that. They're like, there's no way you remember that. But I did. But I must have been 6, 7, 8 years old, something like that. And I was watching some reruns of Johnny Carson, and Johnny Carson was huge. I mean, everybody would stay up, and I think it came on at 11 o'clock, and I would burn the midnight oil on school nights and watch and sneak into the den and watch Johnny Carson. And I remember this amazing episode with Ronald Reagan that just blew me away. I just listening to this man and pragmatic and an orator of epic proportions. I just idolized the guy. I loved him. And I remember him talking about government and taxes. And ever since then, I have been into politics at a very young age. So I wanted to share with you a Johnny Carson interview with Ronald Reagan. And this must have been when he was governor or running. And this was before 1980 and before the Republican convention, which was a contested election. And you can look into that, and where he was essentially promised to run as a Republican nominee in 1980. But I would love for you all to see and hear this and tell me what you think. I'm going to play it right now.
When you and I were boys back in the Midwest,
right,
governments, federal, state, and local, were only taking about 15 cents out of every dollar earned. Today, they're taking almost half of every dollar earned in the United States. And most people don't realize it because the taxes are hidden in the so-called business taxes. The politician that stands up and yells, oh, let's save the little man, let's tax business, and everybody yells hooray. But they haven't figured out that every tax on business is just a part of the cost of production. And the customer winds up paying it when he buys the product. It's a hidden sales tax. There's 116 of them in the suit of clothes that each one of us is wearing.
Suppose
it's interesting, Leroy on our live, on our live show talks about this all the time in regards to there's no such thing as paying your fair share because it always falls upon the middle class. If you decide to tax Chipotle because their overall revenue profile is higher than another corporation, and you go ahead and place upon them the moniker that they're somehow evil because they do better than McDonald's, which is true, or Burger King, which is true, you have to ask yourself the question, well, their margins might be better, Well, why are their margins better? Well, because they're passing the savings on to their customer. They're delivering a high quality product that, yes, is high in sodium and yes, is this and that. But overall, their profit margins are exceptional. Therefore, they make more money than something like McDonald's, which has to sell a 12-cent hamburger at $1.29, where Chipotle can go ahead and put $1.75 in food and charge $6, $7, $8. And then the inclination is to buy chips and salsa and get yourself a soda and all that other stuff. And by the time you look at it, the disparity between McDonald's and what they charge for food and what they overall their food cost is and Chipotle are two different things. However, if you decide to go ahead and tax that company and penalize them based upon their profit margins and their revenue, that savings that the government is assuming that they're making, which they are, is actually passed on to you for the deficit that you have to make up in higher taxes, because Chipotle isn't going to raise their prices because it's the right thing to do, or somehow their product is more equitable than it was 5 minutes ago. They're going to do it because their margins are impacted, and they're going to pass that along to you in higher prices. So when we sit here and say, let's tax the rich, well, the rich owns most of the business in the United States for a reason. These massive corporations drive revenue in the United States and pass that down to the hourly worker. But if you believe that if you decide to tax Apple 60, 70%, that a Mac computer is not going to jump up $5, $6, $7, $800, that's insanity, because you're seeing that. You noticed how Apple's prices have increased with inflation. They haven't decreased. Apple is still making the same darn margin for their shareholders, but the reason why is because they've increased their prices. Their phone, which used to be $600, $700 for a base entry model, is now $1,000, $1,100. And the reason why is because they're having to pay more. Aluminum is more expensive. Semiconductors are more expensive. Liquid crystal displays are more expensive. So what Reagan is ultimately saying is it's robbing Peter to pay Paul. You may go ahead and punch somebody in the head, but they're going to feel it all over. Well, in this case, if you hit the corporations, the rest of the country is going to feel it as well. And this is what we're seeing with this call to eat the rich and increase the taxes on them for them to pay their fair share, when they already do.
A lot of economists have suggested, and I don't know that it'll ever come to be in this country, that if they closed all of the loopholes and corporations, and maybe tax loopholes, and even on the rich certain loopholes, and made a percentage income and made a flat fee without all of the deductions, that the government might raise as much money as they do now.
Oh, sure. And really, the loopholes, this has been overdone by the politicians, too.
No.
The bulk of the money that is taken by what are called loopholes are the legitimate deductions with which, if the people didn't have them, they couldn't pay their income tax. Interest on their mortgage, interest on the installments on their car, their property taxes on their home if they have one, and so forth. These are, in politicians' eyes, loopholes. But we ought to have tax reform, and we ought to start by making it so simple that you don't have to hire a lawyer to find out how much you owe every year.
Ain't that the truth? Johnny Carson is such a smart man, so intelligent, so quick-witted. And to see Johnny Carson and Ronald Reagan sit from each other and just see a higher level of conversation, a higher level of intellect, you just don't see that anymore. Jimmy Fallon would be making dick and fart jokes at this point, and then Joe Biden would be staring off into the crowd trying to find, his brother's third cousin's roommate or something and wave at them auspiciously. It's not the same thing. It's not the same type of people. The conversation has lowered into a guttural one that is just nonsensical and is just circular conversation. Here, this is where policy could be made on a late night talk show where Ronald Reagan and Johnny Carson are having a conversation where great ideas are coming from. Imagine, it's the truth. We have to go and hire a CPA or hire a lawyer to do our taxes or some sort of financial advisor. And I never had to do that. My wife would do TurboTax and we would call it good. But the complexity as we get older, things change. We have our retirement, our 401k. We have a small business like we do here. My wife works. I don't, but I have a freelance company for media. All of those things together It's too complicated, and we're smart people. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to, sit down and do this, minus the 40,000 pages of tax law and tax code that are on the books that nobody understands. And the hilarious thing is when you go to that CPA or H&R Block or whatever, and you sit down with them, the first thing that they do is they open a book and try to figure out what the rule is, or they look on the computer. None of them know what it is. That's how complex. No problem is the same. It's like a thumbprint. And it's hilarious. You walk in and you're like, listen, I have a basic question. And then they go and start looking in their book. And they're like, wait a second, you don't know? And they're like, man, problems with the IRS and tax code is like a snowflake. None of them are the same. It's always different. This is what Ronald Reagan is talking about. And it's a great point.
That's for sure. It used to be a little simplified, but not anymore.
Johnny, we live in the only country in the world where it takes more brains to figure out your income tax than it does to earn the income.
Amen.
You're right.
Amen.
We've gotten in the habit over the last 40 years of thinking that government has the answers. There's very little that government can do as efficiently and as economically as the people can do themselves. And if government would shut the doors and sneak away for about 3 weeks, we'd never miss them. Our biggest problem is that we have built a permanent structure of government, federal, state, and local. The permanent employees, and they've come to the place that they actually determine policy in this country more than does the Congress of the United States. Mm-hmm. There are 14.5 million public employees in the United States. That's quite a voting bloc. And the bureaus and agencies, now in Washington, I heard you talking earlier about some of the research programs. Mm-hmm. What would you say if I told you about a study in which this was called
this is great.
The demography of happiness. And in this study, the government found out that young people are happier than old people. And they found out that people that earn more are happier than people that earn less.
Wow, that's good.
And they found out that well people are happier than sick people.
That's good. Well, that's not glad
this
to
was
know that.
$249,000 to find out it's better to be rich, young, and healthy than old, poor, and sick.
See, Ronald Reagan was so good at, if you have not, a lot of people question why is he talking about economy with Reaganomics? Well, first of all, Reagan never even coined the term Reaganomics, and Reaganomics, trickle-down economics, wasn't necessarily what Ronald Reagan was pushing. That's what the Democrats sold, Tip O'Neill and those guys. That was the narrative. Reagan just wanted to unthrottle government. He wanted to deregulate the throttling of small businesses and allow corporations to ultimately compete against one another, not to have conglomerates, not to have Ma Bell, not to have a Google or a Facebook or a Dell or a Gateway, which ultimately, corners the market and then decides and dictates the overall value of their product based upon not need and necessity, but availability. Reagan was so intelligent at being a master orator. He could tell a story better than anybody, and he sucks you in whether you like him or not. And that's the great thing about Reagan. The press crucified him, and posthumously people have been very hard on Reagan, but he was funny. He was intelligent. He was very much like Barack Obama. Now, I don't really love Barack Obama's policy, but I loved him as an orator. I enjoyed listening to him, even though a lot of the things he said was full of crap, but he was also very intelligent and very funny. This is the brand of politician that Reagan created. We don't see much of that. And this is why a lot of people love Donald Trump. His type of funny could be cruel, but it also is very honest. And that is something Reagan for sure was. And whether it was a world leader like Gorbachev, or he was sitting across a family friend who was at his ranch, or someone he acted in Bedtime for Bonzo, he was always unique and always genuine. And those two things are always symbiotic with each other in a real person. It's fantastic.
A poll was taken recently that found out that only 46% of the people in the poll could name their United States congressman. But what was worse, 86% of those who could name him couldn't tell you a single thing that he represented or stood for.
They just knew that he represented the state. But
he was a congressman, but what's he doing while he's up there? And the same is true at the local levels of government. And
ask yourself a question. Do you know your state legislatures? Do you know your congressmen? I know that's a silly question, but more importantly, do you know your city councilman? Do you know your sheriff? Do you know the local magistrate? Do you know the constables? Do you know the county clerk and the recorders? Because those are the people who truly make your life go round or make it stall. Local, city, state government is absolutely more important than federal. And that's the way it should be. Your governor, your senators, your state legislatures, your city council, those people impact your taxes. They impact your water bill. They impact your energy bill, your property taxes, your roadways, your bridges, which businesses open, which businesses don't open, how much you pay for schooling, how much you don't, whether a new sports center is actually needed, or maybe it's not time to do that and just let the government sit and not spend more money. All of those things impact you. And what Ronald Reagan's saying here is it's okay to know the big dog. It's okay, but he doesn't know you. But I guarantee the local city councilman who you're sitting across from breakfast knows you, and they need your vote. It's a very interesting way of looking at politics, that they're more homegrown than this, empirical hierarchy that we have right now, that nobody will ever meet a president. How many of you have met presidents? That's the question, right? Ask yourself that. Have I ever met the president of the United States or a former president of the United States? I've had the absolute honor of meeting two. But I'm also in a little bit of a different position in the job that I was doing. The average American will never meet the president of the United States and never have their ear, and that's terrifying. But you can go talk to your city councilman, you can talk to a mayor, you can talk to a legislator. All you have to do is take the initiative to want change and have something to say.
All the rest, but...
So you're saying people really have to take an active interest, and you have to have citizen action groups locally and
let them know. See, the special interest groups... Now, the special interest groups aren't, as everyone thought, big, powerful business interests or something that are going to persuade government to do things. As a matter of fact, I don't know anyone with less influence today in government than business. They're just a convenient whipping boy. But it's the groups that have got a particular axe to grind. You can't have a power plant because it might interfere with the seagulls. Now, I think I'm an environmentalist. And I do not agree with those people way over on the edge who pave the whole country over in the name of progress. But also, I don't like those on the other extreme that won't let you build a house unless it looks like a bird's nest. Someplace in the middle, we got to allow people are ecology too.
Right.
Well, this kind of group, and they want their protection.
Listen, that people are ecology too. Isn't that interesting that we have to live cohesively with the earth? Now, Reagan, if he saw what was happening today with global warming, but then also look at the people who are dumping radioactive waste in the middle of the Ohio River, probably he would be saying the same thing, that we need a moderate centrist attitude about this. But there is nothing but polar opposites and extremes in today's politics. And it doesn't matter what the issue is, like affirmative action. Nobody's cared about that for 58 years, but all of a sudden it's a hotbed of topics because of what the Supreme Court did. And everyone's an expert, and it always blows me away. And for instance, that just popped up. Supreme Court just blocked Joe Biden's giveaway on free college tuition. See, folks, we're getting back to the Constitution. This is great. You're seeing a cultural shift because of the Supreme Court. And you can sit here and say all you want that you don't like Donald Trump. But you know what? You better thank him and Mitch McConnell. And I'm not a Mitch McConnell fan. I despise McConnell. I don't think McConnell is worth the clothes he wears. But if it wasn't for McConnell blocking Garland as Supreme Court, and if it wasn't for Donald Trump, we wouldn't have what we're seeing. I know that's in the middle of the show, but darn it, I just got goosebumps, and that's awesome. Biden is like 0 for 9 with the Supreme Court. Let's finish this up, and then I got to do another video on that.
Did a program. Hundreds of dollars have been added to the cost of an automobile, putting gadgets on it to clear up the air. We're the only country in the world that's set out to do it that way. When budget deficits are what's causing inflation, I don't see that there's any room to be on either side of that argument.
Yeah,
I think the answer to curing inflation is a balanced budget.
Now,
amen.
How do you do that? I mean, how do you balance the budget?
Well, balancing the budget is like protecting
You don't
your
spend more than you take in, right?
No, it's like protecting your virtue. You have to learn to say no.
I don't remember that. That's great. That's so great.
There's got to be another way. What's the second option?
Well, there's some ways that this could be brought about. First of all, that limitation. Here's another one. Why shouldn't we have, in addition to a simplified income tax, why shouldn't we also have a law that says that any time a legislator or a congressman introduces a spending program, he has to introduce with it a tax program to pay for it? Then let the people find out. There was a woman that, from a financial firm that was back at the President's Economic Council, and her words weren't quoted. Everybody else's words got in the paper, all the Hellers and the Galbraiths and all the so-called economists. And I have a degree in economics, so I can say this. I think an economist is someone who has a Phi Beta Kappa key on one end of his watch chain and no watch on the other. This woman said that you go to the polls and you ask the people, do they want some social service, some program that government can give? And the people in the polls are apt to read and say, hey, that sounds good, yeah. But she says that isn't exactly accurate. She says put a $100 bill in each person's hand and then show them the program and say, now, isn't that a nice program? Do you want it? Give me the $100. And she says, see what the poll says then, and how many people hang on to the $100 instead of the program.
In other words, if it's rather hidden and someone doesn't know exactly where it's going to come
they
from.
All the government programs start $1 down and we'll catch you later. And they multiply all of those things that you were... The Office of Management and Budget in Washington, that's responsible for the budget, putting the budget together, cannot even tell you how many boards, commissions, agencies, bureaus, and departments there are in the federal government. But all of them can pass regulations, and those regulations have the force of law. And the difference is, when you break the law, you're innocent until proven guilty. When you break a regulation, the fellow that charges you with breaking the regulation, you're guilty.
Right, that's
if
right.
you want to take him to court and prove you're innocent, that's up to you. And all of these are things that yes, we can trim the budget. There's enough fat in the federal government that if you rendered it, you could wash the world. Maybe it's time for realignment between people who might find themselves in the wrong parties. Maybe there are some people still voting. I was a Democrat most of my life. I became a Republican only not too many years ago. And I had the pleasure of telling some of those people that are saying the Republican Party ought to broaden its base the other day that when I switched parties, I didn't do it because the two parties were alike. I did it because they were different. And I think that the two parties
If you
ought to
render
stand
the
up with
fat of the United States government in the budget, you could wash the world. It's you know, I think about gifts, and I think about God-given gifts. By the way, this is the Don't Unfriend Me show. My name is Matt Spear. I apologize. I wanted to make this show 10 minutes and just, I get sucked in. I listen to Reagan and I get excited because I think we can go back there again someday. But it's going to take somebody who can understand that the middle of the road, that weaving between the fence posts is okay, but riding the fence is not. There's a very big difference. It's okay to muddy the lines a little bit. But when you think about how intelligent he was and the gifts that he was given by God, it reminds me of an amazing running back who, you know, ran for thousands of yards, but had to retire when they're 32 years old. Or look at Barry Sanders, because they were given this amazing gift and they use it to its full potential, but unfortunately their bodies could not hold on to it. You look at painters, or you look at poets, or great actors like Heath Ledger, who was such an amazing talent. He gave us just a few handful of movies that were fantastic and palpable and moving, but that candle that burned twice as bright lasted half as long. And Reagan's mind was one of those. He was so intelligent and ultimately was given the gift of abnormal intelligence and speaking skills, and his mind was taken from him. And it just tells you you're granted gifts and you're granted exceptional talents and everything that you possibly could want to achieve. And everyone has that. Some people are amazing poets, and some people are songwriters, and some people are amazing doctors and astronauts. But there's always a give and take when it comes to exceptionalism. And I think Ronald Reagan proves that in everything that he said, because there's always a causation to what he says, that A and B may be true, but never forget about C, because the result is more important necessarily than getting there or wasting time or spending. That we may go ahead and try to make those things work year after year. We may have to focus on programs that no longer work, or pay government contracts that should have been released in the 70s or 80s. And we're not asking ourselves the question as to why. We're looking at the A and B and not looking at the result that could have. And I think that's what Reagan always tried to do, was simplify it to the common man. He was so darn good on it. I hope that I have given you some decent commentary, because honestly, sitting here and just listening to Ronald Reagan would have been a much better show, but Facebook and YouTube wouldn't let me do that. They would ding me for copyright. I hope you had a good time. Thanks for watching the Don't Unfriend Me show. We'll be back tonight at 8 o'clock with Olivia, Leroy, Amy, and myself with a live show. You can find us at The DUM Show across all social media. Please do that. Stop by The DUM Show at thedumshow.com. Pick yourself up a hat, a shirt, whatever, and support the show in any way you can. It keeps the lights on and keeps me coming back day after day. Remember, it's Red Friday. God bless. We'll leave with a message of 22 veterans a day. I hoped you enjoyed me walking down memory lane with Ronnie. It was an amazing soul and amazing talent. Have a good night. See ya at 8 o'clock.
I'm David Boreanaz with the Cast of SEAL team, and we have an important message for returning vets.
We want you to know if you're struggling to cope, there's help and it's just a phone call away.
The Veterans Crisis Line is staffed with experienced professionals who know your struggles.
There's no greater sacrifice in service to our country. We're able to enjoy our freedoms because of it.
Your service is important, you are important.
For vets and their families, the Veterans Crisis Line is here to help 24 hours a day. Please call